thank you for the opportunity to reflect upon your word and to look into the life of your covenant people in a dark time. May we learn from that and not repeat it. We pray this in Jesus' name, amen. All right. So Abimelech, we looked at last week, the failed kingship. So Abimelech's dad, Gideon, said he didn't want it but took the job. Abimelech said he wanted it and failed at the job. So we still have Israel. In those days, there was no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's where we are. Except for, so the Jepthah little vignette is bookended by two listings of what are called minor judges. And I think they're there to bookend Jepthah for a couple of reasons. Is one, Jepthah is an ousted child who has no legitimacy to anything, and Jepthah has only one child. And then you bookend these three judges who have tons of kids, and none of them die. And so you had the Abimelech story where 69 of Gideon's sons die, and then you get the Jepthah story where you got death and you got an only child, which we'll get to, and then at the end of that you get another listing of judges that have lots of progeny and ride donkeys, which means something. It's another glimpse at the monarchy. So when you have that many kids, you got to have a harem, or you got something in the water that nobody else has. And the donkey thing has a little bit of royalty ring to it. So you get failed kingship in Abimelech. You get a glimpse at kingship in the minor judges. You get another failed attempt in Jepthah, sort of, and then another glimpse with the minor judges at the end of the Jepthah saga. But what you don't see in the minor judges that bookend Jepthah is there's no need for deliverance. I think they've already just kind of said, "Hey, we'll rule. We'll try to rule a bit." So that's my take. That's probably not the consensus popular Orthodox take, but it's mine. So, but you definitely got the progeny thing. You got kids, I think, that are really big in that, which is put in contrast to the Jepthah story. So, in the Jepthah story, the cycle that we've looked at starts back. You have idolatry again, and then you got oppression, and the oppression is what I call it's dual and cruel. So you get two nations oppressing, the Ammonites and the Philistines. Philistines aren't mentioned. We'll deal with them in Samson next week. But the oppression is really brutal. It's physical. There's cruelty. What happens is Israel gets crushed, literally, in that. So God's about done with the covenant people. So you get the Ammonites are going to be dealt with in Jepthah, and then you'll get the Philistines dealt with in Samson. So you get something interesting in the Jepthah saga. So you get the cry out, but the cry out now with Israel is accompanied by confession. Before, it was just help us, help us, help us, we're getting oppressed. Now it's help us, we did something wrong. Yeah. You think, well, maybe we're getting teased with a little bright spot in Judges. Maybe. And then you get the most bizarre thing. You know what God says? No. Go let your gods take care of you. I'm done with you. Now that's a bit of a paraphrase. You probably won't find that in the Hebrew text anywhere, but if I were going to write a paraphrase of this, that's what I would say. And then God reminds them, right, that, you know what, I've delivered you a bunch, I've delivered you a bunch, I've delivered you a bunch. And so Go and cry to your other gods that you've chosen. Let them take care of you, and let's see what happens. But, God. Anyway, so you get confession again, and then you get God being the God of the covenant. So remember that the thing about covenant that's really important to remember, especially when God makes a covenant, when God makes a covenant, God never pulls out of the covenant. There may be stipulations to the covenant. There may be consequences for not honoring the covenant, but God does not pull out of the covenant. God doesn't quit covenants. So, in the times before, God wanted to quit covenant at Sinai, and Moses talked him down, and so, God repented or relented or changed the mind. So, because God's not going to leave the covenant. I wonder if Israel knows that. But you do get confession, right? We have sinned, and then they say, okay, this is, by the way, good for them for confessing sin, bad for them for the next part of the confession. Well, just do to us what you want to. Okay. All right, you asked for it. Right. You asked for it. Because, by the way, this is, after Deborah, this is the highest point of the book of Judges right here. And by the way, it's not very high. That makes sense? So God says, okay. You know what God says? I can't bear to see you suffer. Yep.
Can you give like a broad picture of where they're at? I mean, they're in oppression, right? So they're under someone else's rule.
Yeah. So it's physical. I mean, it's brutal war that's going on. That's happened. That I would say maybe not even war. They're not fighting. They're just getting drugged to prison. They're getting killed. They're getting their cattle, their women are taken away. I mean, it's that kind of cruel oppression. So where it's just maniacal stuff that's come in.
I think about this because we watched the shows and whenever it showed when they were under Egyptian rule, and I can see that picture of they're how were they worshiping anything? Obviously they're worshiping Baal, but they're constantly under slaves. And how did they gather themselves together?
Yeah, so I think the oppression begins after the cycle of idolatry is well entrenched. Right. So there's idol worship that goes on, which is I think part of what Judges has a little bit of dark sense of humor to it. And part of what God says to them is part of that. It's a bit sarcastic, right? Hey, you got your gods. Look where it's kind of look where they got you. So see, this is very, by the way, reminiscent of what Elijah does at Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. Remember? Now go ahead and call on your God. Let's see what happens. And but God's compassionate. That's the thing, right? God acts compassionate. He could not bear to see the people suffer, even though he brought the suffering on the people. And they do confess. Right? One little snippet of bright spot. Now, depending on who you believe and when things happen, that the Ruth story, remember, is in the period of the Judges. So it happened somewhere between, I think, Gideon and Samson. Gideon makes more sense to me because of the famine, but the famine's caused by the Midianites in the Gideon story. So it could happen in this point, but it's in this time frame, right? In these, was where Ruth fits in, I think, chronologically, as best as I can tell. So there is a bright spot too. I mean, Ruth is the bright spot, other than Deborah, in the whole Judges saga. So, but that's a whole nother book, and I'm not teaching Ruth. So, because I don't want you to be happy. I want you to be like me. I want you to be unhappy with the Judges. So, but right, God's compassionate, and I think that's the big part. So the cry goes out. God can't bear to see people suffer, and then Jepthah shows up on the scene. So Jepthah is a Gileadite, which is part of the Manasseh tribe. And he is the son of I have to say this politically correct now, or I'll be chastised. He is the son of an irreputable woman. Can I say that? He's illegitimate in some ways. And I think the NRSV does calls her a prostitute or a sex worker or whatever you want to have that label is. So his family basically says, "Hey, you're not bona fide. You need to get out." So he does, and he moves to a place of all things called Tob, which is the Hebrew word for good. Okay, and there's nothing that's good happening in good, right? When he moves to good, he's not very good. He's an outlaw, a raider, probably. He's a vigilante guy. Worthless fellows. He hangs out with worthless fellows. They have their idea of a good Friday night is a good bar fight, and let's go steal something, right? And if we can't steal it, let's break it. And he's just a ruffian. And that's probably his best quality, by the way, in my opinion. He's good at that. So he's really good at that. He is called a mighty warrior, which means he knows how to fight. And listen, the Ammonites are whipping up on Israel, and they need somebody. They need somebody. So, you know how it is. If somebody nasty is messing with you, you want somebody nasty on your side, right? So when I was in business for myself, I kept an attorney on retainer. Not that I really ever needed him, because he was the nastiest attorney in East Texas. And all I would say is, you don't want to mess with my attorney. If you want to lawyer up, my lawyer up is nastier than yours, I can promise. So, I won't say his name. So, anyway. But that's what you want, right? If you got a cruel people oppressing you, who are you going to go? You're not going to go hire a negotiator, right? Even though he does try to negotiate a little bit. You're going to go hire a nasty guy who's got a nasty reputation. Jepthah's got it. And so, interestingly enough, you know what you get in this story? Or what you don't have? Is you don't have God raising Jepthah up. So the people, right? So this speaks to the people. So remember that the overall ethic of Israel is on a decline throughout the book of Judges. Again, I think post-Deborah. Well, maybe even with Deborah. But so they don't even wait on God. They just go hire their vigilante. And so he says, "Come and be our commander," which is really an interesting translation. It really means to rule. Come be our ruler. So, you know what? Jepthah kind of does what God does. So when they repent and God says, "Yeah, no," Jepthah goes, "Yeah, but don't you remember? I'm the guy you kicked out of here. I wasn't good enough for the party. I couldn't get into the fraternity, and now you want me to be the president?" Yeah. Anyway, so why do you come to me now? And they said, "Oh, listen, we need you, we need you, we need you." So notice what he says. This is in verse 9. "Yeah, if you bring me in, I will be your head." Listen, that's not figurehead, the face of the organization thing. That's, I will rule you. If you want me, it's going to cost you. Here's what it's going to cost you. I'm going to be your ruler. Okay. And then, the people swore on God and we'll do what you say. Good enough, good enough, good enough. Well, you start that motion. So remember what they said to God. Do to us whatever you will. Here's what there's going to be done to them. You're going to get a guy that wants to rule you. So Jepthah does one thing well, other than fight. He fights well. Jepthah does make one attempt at diplomacy. He goes to the Ammonites and kind of says, hey, why are you doing this? Why do you want to come take our land? And the Ammonite king has a bit of revisionist history. So, this goes back to Numbers 21. And basically says, hey, look, we're just, you took it from us. We just want it back. And Jepthah says, I think you got it wrong. Shall we go back and watch the film and see? And so he recounts what happens. So after they wander for 40 years, they're about to enter into the land, and they need to go through Moab, and Moab turns them away, and they need to go to the land of the Ammonites, and they get turned away, and Jepthah kind of reminds them, hey, you had your chance to partner with God and didn't, way back when. I guess the Ammonite king doesn't like the revisionist history too much. So he says, diplomacy's not going to work in this one. Fairly. A little better than the Ammonite king. So, yeah. So, but he's got, I'll say this about history while you brought it up. There's no such thing as true, here's the facts history. Okay? All history is told from a perspective and to a perspective. Right? It just is. It's okay. That's just how it is. But you know how. I used to do a little bit of investigative work for a law firm in Tyler, just because thought I needed to. I don't know why I did it anyway. Thought it'd be fun. And you know how it is. You talk to 7 different people who saw something, and you get 7 different views. It just is. It's from perspective, right? And some of them were probably even true of the 7 views. I think he's trying to make a point. Look, this thing, don't blame it on us. We didn't start this. Matter of fact, if you'd have just let us pass through, it'd have been okay. Which is, I think, basically right. So Jepthah said, we'll just let God sort it out. But the king of the Ammonites did not much care for Jepthah's proposal. Diplomacy, one of the troublesome things about judges is diplomacy is not used well. It always goes to blows somewhere. There's a lot of violence in that. And I guess that's, one of the things that's troubling about judges is it's somewhere somebody's got to be stronger than somebody else to settle things down. There's not much. The compromise that happens is religious compromise, right? It's syncretism. But there's no compromise between parties and people, it doesn't seem like to me. I don't know. But, I got a very negative view of judges, okay? And I do wonder about diplomacy in our world today, if there is such a thing anymore. If there is a spirit of that, of hey, can we compromise for a greater good here? And I'm not sure. I think we live in such a partisan world that we're so ensconced in my ways is the way. Y'all talk me off the ledge on that. I could be wrong. It just seems that's where our culture, not just our culture, I think the world culture, it's kind of gotten that way. Maybe that's too jaded of a look. So I'm willing to be talked down. So yeah. So I don't. Is there a time that you can go back to in my lifetime, and maybe it was just more subtle? It wasn't on the news all the time in the 70s and 80s, right? It's not. It's certainly not in our country. It's not any more divisive than it was in the civil rights movements. Maybe it's just because it's on TV and social media now more. But I think I've seen that, though, in a lot more places. Maybe I just recognize it now. Maybe that's the thing. I see it in our school systems at times. I see it in our churches. I certainly see it in government. I see it in businesses. I mean, I just think about even this, with this whole thing with the building, whose fault is it, and who can we, is this going to go on somebody? And it's just I don't know. It just seems like it's tough to negotiate anymore, and to find a spirit of diplomacy.
Yeah, I think it goes to, you back up an emotion. Maybe it's trust. There's so little trust.
Maybe that's it.
In the world that it's hard to negotiate because neither party trusts the other party to be dealing honestly with them.
Yeah, and maybe in the panoply of world history, diplomacy's never really worked, right? That might makes right, so to speak. And but give it to Jepthah. He did try. Right? He gives up the old college try. And then you get another one of those strange things in Judges that just drives me nuts. You get another Spirit of the Lord thing, right? It comes upon Jepthah. It comes upon Samson all the time. And he doesn't use it for anything but revenge. It comes upon Gideon. And but I've kind of got to grips with it, with what that's about. And that is that God does some empowering through the Spirit to whatever needs, I guess, is going to happen. So he goes on the offensive to get ready to go fight the Ammonites, and then he does the dumbest thing. Right? He makes a vow. So the question is, I mean, we don't get that I'll deliver the Ammonites into your hand language like we do with Gideon and the Midianites, or with Deborah and Barak. But does he need to make the vow? I mean, it seems to me that God's at work here, ever so subtly or not so subtly. There's confession made, even though we don't get the language of raising up the deliverer and those kind of things, that the vow was so unnecessary. Yeah, there was no good outcome, right? Especially, there's some debate about manuscripts. It goes to the Lord, if you will give the Ammonites in my hands. Is it whoever or whatever? Yeah. Yeah. So, but given, let me give you a little cultural background that kind of shed it. So, NRSV translated whoever. I'm not sure what everybody what. I mean, I looked at it in the Hebrew. You know, there's textual variants, and not for sure is it whoever, whatever. Yeah. But in the ancient Near East, in that culture, when a warrior comes home victorious, the people who lead the victory parade are women with timbrels and dancing. I mean, that's kind of that's the known custom of the ancient Near East for a war hero. Right? So he's only got one kid, and she's a female. We'll assume she still has a wife. So if you know if the custom is followed, who's it going to be? Anyway. So here's the second thing about the vow too. So the whoever, whatever. I mean, it could be an animal sacrifice, right? But it's not like a cow's coming out of your house. Most likely. Most likely.
ESV took the easy road that says whatever, and then they have a footnote or whoever.
Or whoever, right? Well, that's how you do it, right? You cover it all. So the other thing is to be offered up to me as a whole burnt offering. So that's the olah in Hebrew. And let me tell you, that is what it says. That means every piece of you goes up in smoke, or every piece of it. So in the conquest of Canaan, there are 3 cities that are designated as whole burnt offerings: Jericho, Hatzor, and Ai. And guess what? They go up in smoke. They're supposed to. And then, of course, Achan stole some stuff from Jericho, and that didn't work out well because they got defeated at Ai. Then Ai had to pay the price for it. But that's what the Holocaust. That's where we get the Holocaust from. That word, right? It's a whole burnt. Everything goes to God. There's nothing left. That's not a metaphor. There's nothing left. Okay. Yep.
On verse 29, it talks about the Spirit of the Lord coming on Jepthah.
Mm-hmm.
Is based on the way the verse comes after that, is the Spirit of the Lord still on Jepthah when he makes the vow?
Yeah. So that's really an interesting concept, because when you see this that starts to come up in Gideon and Jepthah and then Samson, it seems like it just has to do with power, right? Not theological insight, not spirituality. It seems to be an empowerment, especially when you get to Samson. All Samson uses for is to beat stuff up and kill people, right? Yeah. So that would be that's always one of the questions to me about that phraseology in the latter part of Judges, is exactly what does that mean, right? It doesn't seem to me that it has anything to do with spirituality, though, of connecting to God in this deeply intimate way, where we would think about the Spirit of the Lord on us as an indwelling, a connectivity, relational aspect, right? I mean, at least I would. So, don't want to put that on y'all. You may have a different thing in mind on that. So you get this vow, right? Whoever, whatever, whole burnt offering. Unnecessary, in my opinion. Yeah, because he uses he kind of hedges his bet, right? He does the Jacob thing at Bethel. If this is this, then I'll let you be my God, right? Yeah. And that you find in Genesis 28, the bargain at Bethel. He's hedging his bets, right? He knows God apparently, and at least the writer of Judges calls him Yahweh, God, the covenant God. So it seems like he knows God, and he said, "It shall be the Lord's; it'll belong to God," right? Right, but and Jonathan, right?
God will confine me, I want to control God.
Right.
Instead of just pleading, God, please help, please allow me to do this, please enable me to do this, and that means that. It's like you're trying to take control. And I see it more as instead of submitting to what God or what comes, you're trying to set yourself up as a being.
Right. Which I think is exactly right in this case, right? He wants to be the head of Israel. He's setting himself up, right? It's about self-assertion, which really starts to take some traction in the Gideon story. You know, Israel's more and more self-assertive, and the leaders are more and more, and it becomes about them. And they become the center of the universe and not God, and they become the star of the show and not God, at least in their mind, right? Where God's still the star of the show. So you got a vow, and you got a warrior, and you got a war, and you got just 2 verses. Hey, they win, basically. Right? Jepthah wins. Okay. That's by the way. This is as much about God's compassion on Israel as it is about Jephtah's prowess. Okay. So Jepthah wins, and guess who comes out of the house? The one and only Progeny. And then Jepthah, in true fashion of the times, says, this is Greg's paraphrase, he forms it in the form of a question. It's this: it's your fault. Why did you come out of the house? Hey, you're a war hero. Ching, 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 right? I'm doing my war victory dance, just like the culture says to do it. And she does. And you have brought me very low, right? And you have become the cause of great trouble. Yep. For I open my mouth and I can't take it back. Is that true, by the way? Yeah. Ever break a vow to God? Hey, God, get me out of this, and then? Right. Still around, right? So, he could have. Right. Yeah, he could have redeemed it. So, the question is, there's an offering. So, the great debate, right, amongst biblical scholar types. Does he kill her, or does he put her in the convent? I'm just going to tell you, there were no convents in those days. Now, he could have made her a temple or something, but there's, no temple yet either. So, unless there be a pagan temple, which there would be that. So, that's always the question, right? What is the offering about? She's a whole burnt offering given. Every piece goes up in smoke to God. That's the question. Could he have backed out of the vow? And the other question is, why doesn't God intervene here like God intervenes with Abraham and Isaac? Of course, God directed that one and said, go up and offer your only son. Yeah. No, I don't see God anywhere in Jepthah except for God empowers Jepthah to win the battle. And God's compassionate toward Israel's oppression. And ultimately God, I think, does win. So, in Leviticus 27, there is an out, right? You can buy out, so to speak, a vow for a sum of money. He could have offered, something probably to the Levites. But remember, the Levites are because I started this in the end of the book, which is about the Levites. They're pretty unscrupulous as well. So they're not stellar. I think he offers her as a human sacrifice. Now, there's some that would say this is metaphoric. She's into service, but where? You got a loose coalition You got no set place. Tabernacle worship seems to be non-existent. You don't have a kingship. You don't have a temple. Where are you going to put her into service? So this is another one of those things in Judges that gives you a little heartburn, right?
It's not any of the language that Samuel uses.
No. Yeah, she dedicates her son, but not a whole burnt offering, right? She dedicates her son to the Lord's service. That was her prayer, right? And even before he's born. And yeah, it would certainly indicate that that's what he does, right? Well, I mean, I think that's where some people would say that, but there's but her death doesn't redeem anything, right? So I don't see that as any kind of messianic, thread. What you do have in here is a lot of paganism, because the pagans did human sacrifices a lot, right? The gods of Canaan, and so that was part of their ritual. And listen, it's a hard thing to swallow, right? But she seems to be okay. You said this to God. I'm not going to bring the curse of God on you because you did something dumb, Dad. I just don't know that he knows the Levitical law, that there could have been a redemption price for her, and he just won a battle, right? So he's bound to have some spoils of war, and he was a raider anyway. I'm sure he had a little stash somewhere. I don't know. It just seems it's just heartbreak. It really is kind of a heart-wrenching end to the battle story of that. But I think it speaks to Jepthah's character, and I think it speaks to the character of Israel and the judges. And I mean, the harder question for me is, why doesn't God intervene? Not that Jepthah did something dumb. That seems to be the rule of the day in Judges. Why doesn't God intervene here and provide, remind Jepthah or take her away, or so? What's that, Carrie? Yeah, and I think that's a historical question, right? That we're going to ask is, where is God? Where is God in this story? Why didn't God show up? And I would say God is in the story, but the Israel at this time in Judges is so dark, they can't see God. And I think sometimes that happens to us. Things get so dark, even within us, that we just can't see God. And God's still around, by the way. God's presence is there. Because God does act, even if ever so subtly, in the Jepthah. He does respond to Israel's confession. God says, I do not want to see you suffer. At least with the Ammonites. So, yeah, it's full of moral dilemmas for me. Now, don't forget, Jepthah's in heroes in the kind of the heroes of the faith too. He's in Hebrews 11.
So, knowing that story kind of helps you understand why making a vow is so strongly spoken against.
Right.
When you get to the New Testament.
Yeah. Don't make vows, just let your yes be yes and your no be no, right?
Yes, God, I'll go. Your spirit's on me.
Right.
We're going to go win this battle. That's the whole purpose.
Yeah, and so look, Jepthah trusts Jepthah more than anybody else. Right? That's what it comes down to.
This one doesn't. I don't. There's no point in that word
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, this one here, I don't see Uriah.
Yeah, at least in the golden calf story, they said it was Yahweh, right? This is for Yahweh. So, as wrong as it was, that's what they said. So it's glowing all of a sudden. So because and I think you're right, Brandon. This is Jepthah at the core. So you get the Ephraimites again. So remember in the Gideon story, the Ephraimites were upset that they didn't get asked, and then there's a little hoo-ha there, and it kind of gets worked out because Gideon says, "Oh no, you're way too valuable," and so yeah, he's a politician. So Jepthah gets the same response from the Ephraimites, like, "Hey, what about us? Where's our cut?" And but they wanted to share in the glory, not quite so eager to join, maybe. Seems they're angry with Jepthah. They wanted to burn his house down, which would be interesting if he offers his daughter as a whole burnt offering. He burnt her up. Now they want to burn him out. But remember that at the beginning of the Jepthah story, Jepthah tries diplomacy with the Ammonites. He doesn't try diplomacy with his own people, right? The Israelites. No diplomacy now. So he gives an explanation, right, that his first concern was to defeat Ammon, and by the way, this has been going on a while. None of you guys stood up. And when they kicked me out of my hometown, none of you guys said, "Oh, why don't you come stay with us?" So Jepthah said he made a plea. Ephraim doesn't respond. So another rash action from Jepthah, though, in chapter 12. He kind of throws the gauntlet down. Apparently there's this place, Shibboleth, which means stream, and he does a little racial profiling. And right, he knows you can't say the word, and puts a word in that you can't say to separate the folks in the races. So anyway, he calls this his own form of the Civil War, right? He knows what he's doing. This isn't an accident. He puts them to the test, and if they don't pass the test, which he knows they're not going to pass the test, he kills them. And because apparently that if you're from Ephraim, you can't say shh, you have to say shh. So there you go. I don't know what that means in the broad sense of things, but for us today. But it is a form of racial profiling, right, that he does to set up. And he acts like his nature. That's what he does, right? He's a fighter and he's a brawler, and he's a violent guy, and like everybody else, violence just keeps swirling around you, and he judges a very short period of time. He gets 6 years, right?
He gets what?
6 years. He doesn't do very long. He doesn't stay very long. So, listen, it's a dark saga, and the only one worse is the next one. That's Samson, in my opinion. I don't know. Jepthah may be the worst. He may be even worse than Abimelech. But listen, all this shows it's two things, and it does follow up again with more what they call minor judges and progeny and children, and this is all building toward the monarchy. And so the question of judges goes back: does autonomy work, and does God approve the monarchy? Because autonomy is not working, and the monarchy has the illusion of being something better, and in reality, it's really not. Right? You go read Deuteronomy 17; that'll tell you everything you need to know about the monarchy way before it ever happens. But God permits it to happen. So you get another illusion of monarchy with Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon, especially 40 sons and 30 grandsons and 70 donkeys and lots of progeny and harems and all that kind of stuff. Listen, it's a sordid tale. It's awful, and but at the end of the day, God still used Jepthah, which is for the life of me beyond my comprehension. Right? But I guess God uses us, right? In our frailties and shortcomings and all those things. So the saga of downward spiral of ethic morality continues and throughout Judges, and kinds of finds its zenith in its last character, and that's Samson. So, all right, anything y'all want to add to my jaded look at Jepthah? Yet at the same time, right, he is mentioned in that whole chapter in Hebrews 11 about faith. There is some part of Jepthah that was worthy of resonating some trust in God. So maybe, or maybe it is even the honoring of the vow that God would take care of it. So I don't know. I don't even try to speculate with those, with Gideon, and I mean Gideon I can see a little bit. Jepthah and Samson I just have really heartburn over, but the preacher of Hebrews knew something. So maybe I'm just too jaded. So
Sounds complicated. All this stuff that you understand about the Bible, seems like there's probably it almost like you thinks that there's some things that happen or some decisions made that really that don't make sense, should not be there.
Right. Some of it, you're right, Leonard. I think what you're right the first time, it's complicated. It doesn't all make sense to us, but doesn't mean it's not that God doesn't use it, right? And that's the thing. All right. So next week we'll go back to Thursday night and we'll wrap up. Sorry I had to make the switch this week, but circumstances are what they are. So and we'll do the Samson saga. So it's 13 through 16. I know that seems like a lot, but it's. Listen, so my title for the Samson was Sex, Lies, and Videotapes. And I was like, amen, they didn't have videotapes. Sex, Lies, and Bad Pranks. Sex, Lies, and something. So, which is really what the Samson saga is about. So,